Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett. Welcome to another episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. Got a really unique episode for you today. I'm doing this by request because a number of you have asked me, what UFO book do you think I should read? What's the best UFO book? And that's a very difficult question to answer, so I decided to make a list of what I think are the top 50 UFO books that everyone should read. And that's the title of this episode, the top 50 UFO books. This is, of course, a very arbitrary decision. Another person might have come up with a very different list, but this is mine. I'm going to start from number 50 and count down all the way to what I think is the number one UFO book. And this turned out not to be an easy decision. I thought it would be, but it wasn't. There are a lot of books that I wanted to include, which I couldn't include. And in fact, some researchers, I think, could have had multiple spots on this list. So I decided to instead sort of focus on UFO researchers and pick their very best book. So in a way, this is also the top 50 UFO researchers of all times. But no, it's really the top 50 UFO books, and I picked the best book from each researcher, or what I think is the best book. But many researchers have produced books that I think absolutely deserve to be mentioned, but just were edged out. There just wasn't enough space on this list. And I'd like to give just brief honorable mention to a number of these. I would include Yvonne Smith's book, Chosen. I loved Barbara Lamb's book, Alien Meetings, I believe it was called. There are many books that deserve a place on this list. Night Siege by Philip Imbrogno, J. Allen Hynek and Bob Pratt, the story of the Hudson Valley UFO wave. Jim Marr's book, Alien Agenda, is an excellent overview of the UFO phenomena. Ed Walter's book, UFOs Over Gulf Breeze, loved that book. It's very interesting. Nick Pope, a very prolific researcher who wrote a book called Uninvited, definitely deserves a place in your library. I love the book by Mark Davenport, Visitors from Time, which discusses time anomalies associated with UFOs. It's a unique book, which was just barely edged out. The book, any book by Michael Salla, particularly Secret Space Program. Again, he got edged out, but yeah, I would definitely recommend any book by Michael Salla. Bob Pratt's book, UFO Danger Zone, was fascinating, but just didn't quite make the list. I wish I could have included the books by Frank Ficino, Braxton County Monster, and Shoot Them Down. I love his research. Kathleen Martin and Denise Stoner are excellent researchers. I really wanted to include their book, The Alien Abduction Files, but that got edged out as well, as did Ray Hernandez's book, which he edited, Beyond UFOs. It's a huge contribution to the UFO field. I loved the book called Humanoids by Charles Bowen, which he edited. It's a fascinating book about humanoid reports, and one of the first books actually to talk about humanoids associated with UFOs. I loved Australian researcher Bill Chalker's book, Hair of the Alien. What a good book. Should have had a place on this list, but just got edged out, as did the book Abducted by Anne Andrews from England. She wrote a book about her son and her whole family's encounters with ETs. Her son is Jason Andrews. That's a really good book. I would highly recommend it. As I would also recommend Beyond My Wildest Dreams by Kim Carlsberg. Fully illustrated, very well written, just a fascinating book about her own encounters with ETs. I recommend the books by Brad Steiger as well. He wrote a lot of UFO books. He's among the most prolific of UFO writers. His book, Alien Meetings, was excellent. I love Brad Steiger's research because it's all original. He brings out information that other people have never. I mean, a lot of books are kind of rehashes of old material, not his. Any book by Jenny Randles as well. The book Abduction was a great overview, the Pennine UFO mystery. I also loved the book Behold a Pale Horse by Milton William Cooper, which is really a book about government conspiracies. It does touch on UFOs pretty extensively. Deserves a place on this list, but just kind of got edged out, as did the book Chariots of the Gods, a real classic by Eric von Daniken. I don't know why I didn't put that on the list. I really should have. I know some people are going to be angry that their favorite UFO book didn't make this list, but I had to make a choice. So I chose the top 50. And let's just get to these books right now, because these top 50 books, I think, absolutely deserve a place in your library. Each one has made a very valuable contribution to our understanding of the UFO phenomena, has really shaped our beliefs about UFOs and extraterrestrials. And that's why I wanted to put together this list so people have an idea of what to read if they're looking into researching the UFO phenomena. So let's just get started on to the top 50 countdown of the best UFO books of all times. And for number 50, I chose Ellen Crystal's book, Silent Invasion, The Shocking Discoveries of a UFO Researcher. It's an excellent book, a real page-turner about one researcher's experiences and insights into UFO activity, particularly in the Hudson Valley area of upstate New York. It's got some very interesting photographs, a lot of very interesting things to say about UFOs. It's a real suspenseful page-turner of a book. I highly recommend it. For number 49, I chose Sky Crash by Brenda Butler and Dot Street. This is a story about the Rendlesham UFO incident. This is a very famous case, the Bentwaters, Woodbridge. There are many cases, or many books written about this case, but Sky Crash was the first. It broke this case wide open, and that's why I think it deserves a place on this list. For number 48, I chose Mysterious Valley by Christopher O'Brien. Mysterious Valley is the story of the UFO activity in the San Luis Valley in Colorado. And boy, this is fascinating. I mean, you could learn everything you need to know about UFOs from this one book by Christopher O'Brien. Can't recommend it enough. It's a really excellent book with a follow-up book called Enter the Valley. So yeah, if you want to read a good UFO book, look into The Mysterious Valley by Christopher O'Brien. For number 47, I chose UFOs. Generals, pilots, and government officials go on the record. And this is by Leslie Kean, a mainstream journalist. And I chose this book because it's a great book to give to UFO skeptics. This book really, I think, gave a lot of legitimacy to the UFO field. It brought in a lot of skeptics. It helped popularize this subject. And these are witnesses who are pretty much unimpeachable. This book proves that UFOs are a real phenomena and not the product of hoaxes, hallucinations, or misperceptions, as the U.S. military would have you believe. It's an excellent book that deserves to be read. And for number 46, I chose an absolutely pioneering book called Book of the Damned by Charles Fort. I had to put this book on the list because Charles Fort was the first person to write about UFOs. He's absolutely the pioneer of ufology and opened this subject. And he absolutely deserves a place on this list. His book does cover a lot of paranormal stuff, but it was the first to look into UFOs too, and that's why I included it. And now we move to number 45. And for 45, I chose the book Don't Look Up by Danny Gordon and Paul Dellinger. Danny Gordon was a mainstream newsman who got embroiled in a UFO wave in his hometown of Wytheville, Virginia. This book, Don't Look Up, boy, it's a page-turner. It is very exciting. Absolutely deserves to be read. It's a little bit of a sleeper. You probably haven't heard about it, but you should have, because it is an excellent book on a UFO wave that very few people know about. Another real sleeper of a book I gave to the number 44 slot, and this is a book by Walter Webb, a real pioneering researcher, and the book is Encounter at Buff Ledge. It's a multi-witness UFO abduction case, and it's very well written. It's a fascinating, very well-researched account of a UFO abduction. It's an excellent book. I'm surprised more people haven't heard about it, and I think people would really enjoy it, and that's why I gave it the number 44 slot. And now for number 43, I chose the book The Keepers by Jim Sparks. Jim Sparks is pretty well known within the UFO field. Unlike a lot of abductees, he remembers his encounters fully consciously. And his book is fascinating and really gives a lot of insights into this phenomena, a lot of insights into the alien agenda. And I just found it to be a very sincere, moving, and just an interesting book. Absolutely, I would recommend it. And now we move to number 42, which is Magic Eyes Only by Ryan Wood. It was also done with the research of his father, Bob Wood. And this is about UFO crash retrievals. And if you think Roswell is the only UFO crash, just read this book, Magic Eyes Only, and you will see that UFO crashes, while not common, are certainly not as rare as you might think. There are well over 100 of them, and Ryan Wood's research into the whole UFO crash retrieval phenomena is quite comprehensive, and this book is a great overview of the whole UFO crash retrieval phenomena and deserves to be read. And now we move to number 41. And for 41, I chose another book about UFO crashes, but it's called Cosmic Crashes by the prolific UFO researcher author Nick Redfern. He's written a lot of books, and I think Cosmic Crashes is one of his best. And I highly recommend it if you want to know about UFO crashes across the world. This is one that you should definitely read. And now we move to number 40. And this is a great book. It's called Inside the Black Vault by John Greenwald Jr. John Greenwald has been investigating UFOs pretty much his whole life. Ever since he was a teenager, he's been using the Freedom of Information Act to get government documents about UFOs released. And his website by the same name, Inside the Black Vault, is just a huge contribution to this field. Love this book. You absolutely should read it if you haven't, because there's no one quite in this field who is as active as John Greenwald in terms of using the Freedom of Information Act to get information out of the government and into the public's awareness. So yeah, read Inside the Black Vault by John Greenwald. And now we move to number 39. And for 39, I chose a unique book called Messengers. The author is Mike Cleland. He's a highly respected UFO researcher. He's got a number of other books. Messengers is his first, and I think probably his best so far, at least. I love this book. It's got all new information, a lot of first-hand research into very unusual aspects of the UFO phenomena that you don't hear a lot about. Synchronicities, screen memories, the owl connection. It's a really interesting book, and I highly recommend it. He's a very respected researcher who really does his legwork. So I appreciate Mike Cleland as a UFO researcher, and his book Messengers definitely deserves a spot in your UFO library. And now we move to number 38. And for 38, I chose Humanoids Amongst Us by Albert Rosales. This is actually a multi-volume series of books all about exclusively humanoid encounters, stretching back to the 1800s all the way to the 2000s. So well over 100 years of accounts from all over the world. These are cases all collected in one spot about people who've had humanoid encounters. This is an indispensable tool for UFO researchers. I mean, I can't recommend it enough. This guy has done his research, and I just thank God for Albert Rosales and his exhaustive research into humanoid encounters. I found his multi-volume set, Humanoids Amongst Us, to be among the most helpful in terms of a research tool, and just fascinating stuff, all about humanoid encounters. And let's move along. There are a lot of really good books here. Any one of these could have made the top 10 slot, by the way. I mean, the difference between number 50 and number 1 is really just a matter of opinion, I think. So don't be mad at me if your book didn't make the list, or if it's not, ranked higher on this list, because it was a very difficult decision doing this countdown. At any rate, for number 37, I chose Top Secret Magic by Stanton Friedman. Stanton Friedman is, wow, one of the best researchers out there. It's really a shame he passed away. He was doing such excellent work, very highly respected. We owe, the Roswell incident really to him. The book, The Roswell Incident, was based largely on his research. But I chose Top Secret Magic because he talks about MJ-12 and the secret government cover-up group. He dug deep. He proved that, astronomer Donald Menzel was more than likely a government agent. He proved that there is absolutely a cover-up of UFOs. And any book by Stanton Friedman I would highly recommend. But this book, Top Secret Magic, you absolutely have to read it. I'm pretty sure you will like it. And now we move to slot number 36. I think this might surprise some of you. I chose a book by Timothy Green Beckley, a pioneering UFO researcher, editor of several UFO magazines. Been around forever. He just recently passed away. We've lost a true superstar in the UFO field, and it won't be the same without him. But the book I chose is UFOs Among the Stars, which is an absolutely unique book and one of the only books to talk about celebrity encounters. So here we have encounters by a large variety of celebrities, from like musicians, rock stars, movie stars, you name it. Muhammad Ali, Helen Wheels. I mean, I could go on. These are very famous people who have seen UFOs. And this book is just so entertaining and fascinating. And given the public's fascination with celebrities, this absolutely makes a valuable contribution to the UFO field. And I think you'll enjoy it very much, and that's why I included it on this list. So moving along, and for the number 35 spot, I chose UFO Contact from Reticulum by Wendell C. Stevens. This is another superstar in the UFO field. He's published and co-written a number of books about UFOs, particularly contact cases. I very nearly included his multi-volume set, UFO Photographs from Around the World, instead, but decided that UFO Contact from Reticulum was a little bit better because it tells the story of Bill Herman's UFO contact and also has some very clear UFO photographs, photographs of alien artifacts. This is a very fascinating contactee case, which is not well known, but certainly caused got a lot of attention from major UFO researchers when it first became revealed. I highly, highly recommend Wendell C. Stevens' book, UFO Contact from Reticulum. It's got 2 parts, actually, and I'm pretty sure you will enjoy it. So I gave it a slot on this list. Now for number 34. For 34, I chose a book by British researcher Philip Mantle. Love his research. He's highly respected, been in this field for decades, and his book, Without Consent, is an excellent book about onboard UFO encounters, UFO abductions, with many unique cases you can't read about anywhere else. It's a huge contribution to the UFO field and 100% deserves a place in your UFO library. If you want to know about UFO abductions, that's a very good book. And now we move to number 33. And number 33 probably could have landed anywhere on this list and would be right at home. For number 33, I chose Fire in the Sky by Travis Walton, which is actually sort of a release of his book, The Walton Incident. And Fire in the Sky, wow, what a good book. This is one of the most famous cases in the world, the Travis Walton UFO abduction. I know there's some controversy surrounding it, but I'm a huge believer in this case. I think the evidence for its veracity is overwhelming, and if you want to know what happened to Travis Walton, Fire in the Sky, the book, is absolutely a gripping read of what happened to Travis Walton. Can't recommend it enough. And now we move to number 32. And for number 32, I chose the book Flying Saucer Conspiracy by Major Donald Keyhoe. And I could have chosen any book by Major Donald Keyhoe. He absolutely 100% deserves a place on this list. The UFO field would not be the same without him. He's one of the first government insiders to say, hey, your own government is lying about what they know about UFOs. Major Donald Keyhoe is a true hero to this field of ufology. His books are excellent and reveal many first-hand cases of UFO encounters that he investigated personally. Absolutely, I really look up to this guy. The UFO field would not be the same without him. We owe him a lot of debt for his books, and I highly, highly recommend any one of them. But I chose Flying Saucer Conspiracy as one of the best. Another really excellent early book and early researcher is Flying Saucers Uncensored by Harold T. Wilkins. Love his books. They are very, very detailed, very exhaustively researched, just filled, chock full with first-hand cases, a lot of information, cases you won't read anywhere else. He's, again, a pioneering researcher, one of the first to tackle the UFO subject. Can't recommend his research enough. Any book by Harold T. Wilkins, I'm pretty sure you will enjoy. Flying Saucers Uncensored is one of his best. On another very early researcher, really great book that he wrote is Flying Saucers Serious Business by Frank Edwards. Frank Edwards was a mainstream journalist who became embroiled in the UFO controversy, was one of the first to really talk about it. He popularized UFOs on his nationwide UFO radio program. We owe a lot to Frank Edwards. He's a great researcher, had a lot of inside sources, got a lot of information out there that probably we would not have heard about if not for him. And I highly recommend his book, Flying Saucers Serious Business. Now we move to number 29. And for number 29, I chose Unconventional Flying Objects by Paul Hill. This is a sort of a sleeper of a book. It's gotten excellent critical reviews. I think anyone who's looked into it really likes it. This is one of the most scientific books on the UFO phenomena and has some really excellent scientific insights into the nature of UFOs and UFO propulsion and their craft. I love this book. You should absolutely read it. I cannot recommend it enough. And another book I can't recommend enough is UFOs and the National Security State by Richard Dolan. This is actually a two-part volume, so far 2 parts, and covers the UFO government cover-up. It's an excellent best-selling book with all kinds of really interesting information about how the U.S. government in particular has handled the UFO situation, the UFO problem. Love these books. I think it's great, great research, and absolutely deserves a spot on this list. Now we move to number 27. And for 27, I chose The UFO Evidence by Richard Hall. Richard Hall is another very early researcher who worked with NICAP, the National Investigative Committee of Aerial Phenomena. And this is another big book that you can really give to a skeptic to convince them of the reality of UFOs. What I like about the UFO evidence is it covers many different physical types of evidence: landing trace cases, radar visual cases, electromagnetic cases, physiological effect cases, animal effect cases. He really takes a deep, deep look at the evidence for UFOs, and that is the reason I had to include it on this list. And for number 26, I chose a book by Edward J. Ruppelt, Captain Ruppelt of Project Blue Book. And the book is called The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects. And this was a book that I don't think the Air Force wanted him to write. And it is a little skeptical. I think he had some difficult time knowing what he could include and what he couldn't without angering the government too much. But he did. He defected from Project Blue Book, spilled the beans, and talked about our own government's interest in this UFO phenomena, and really laid it out in black and white that UFOs are real and deserve to be researched. It's an excellent book. Can't recommend it enough. You should definitely have it in your UFO library. And now we get to the top 25. And for number 25, I chose a book called Abduction, Measure of a Mystery by Thomas E. Bullard. He's originally a folklorist, but got involved in researching UFOs very early on. And this is a truly pioneering book. He was the first to really do an analytical and statistical study of the UFO abduction phenomena. He outlined the pattern of UFO abductions. He was the first to do so. It's a massive, massive multi-volume series of books. Just a huge, huge contribution to the UFO field. And I think really he approached it from a very scientific angle. And it's not an easy read because it's very scientific, but wow. Great, great research. Can't recommend it enough. And now we move to book number 24. And this was a huge bestseller. It revived a very old case, which we know as Roswell. And for number 24, I chose The Day After Roswell by Colonel Philip Corso. This is a controversial book, but it's one of very, very few books to have hit the New York Times bestseller list. It was a huge bestseller. Definitely revived the whole Roswell case and put forth the idea that Roswell has in fact been reverse engineered, leading to such advances in areas of industries such as the integrated circuit, fiber optics, Kevlar, night vision. It's controversial. Some people have tried to debunk it unsuccessfully, I think. Colonel Corso's credentials are pretty much unimpeachable. And he has quite a bit to say about the UFO crash at Roswell. It's a very, very interesting book. And I'm not at all surprised that it was a bestseller. And that's why I gave it spot number 24 on this list. For number 23, I chose the book Taken by Carla Turner. She wrote, I think, 3 books on the UFO phenomena, Into the Fringe and Masquerade of Angels. Any one of them could have earned a spot on this list. I like her research. It's first-hand research. She dug deep. She talked about her own experiences. Some of these cases are really quite harrowing, but it's really interesting first-hand research into UFO abductions, and I think makes an invaluable contribution to this field, and that's why I included it on this list. And now for number 21. And for number 21, I chose the book Encounters with Star People by Artie Sixkiller Clarke. She's written, I think it's 3 books now. 4? It's at least 3 books, all about first-hand encounters with UFOs. Artie Sixkiller Clarke is one of my favorite researchers of all times. Even though she's relatively new to the field, she's made a huge splash. She's done what no one else has done, which is interview indigenous people from all across North and South America and told their first-hand stories, which have never been told before. It's definitely different from your standard run-of-the-mill abduction book. Wow, these stories are fascinating, unusual, unique. If you're going to pick up any books on UFOs, please don't miss out on the books by Artie Sixkiller Clarke. I love, love, love her research, and these books are fascinating. Wow, love them. So she got a pretty high spot on this list. Now we're into the top 20. And for number 20, I chose Secret Life by David Jacobs. David Jacobs is one of the top researchers into UFO abductions in the world. His book Secret Life is a really fascinating look into the whole UFO abduction phenomena. I'm not going to say that I agree with all of his conclusions, but boy, his research is fascinating. Secret Life and the other books he's written are all must-reads, for sure, if you want to know the truth about UFOs, what it's like to be contacted. Secret Life provides absolutely fantastic research into the UFO phenomena and is highly, highly recommended. Now we move to number 19. And for number 19, I could have chose any book by this researcher, Dolores Cannon. The Custodians was a great book. I mean, all her books are great. I chose 3 Waves of Volunteers, the 3 Waves of Volunteers. This is one of many of her books, which continues to stay on the bestseller list for a very good reason. Her research is first-hand stuff. It's one of very few hypnotherapists who worked tirelessly to hypnotize people and recover lost memories. She's able to link a lot of this stuff to paranormal aspects of UFOs. Her research is really interesting, and there's a lot of disinformation in this field, and I love her books because I think they're very sincere, valid, truthful information, and I don't think it's any coincidence that her books continue to be bestsellers because they're very, very interesting and have a lot of first-hand information that you can't get anywhere else, and that's why I gave her spot number 19 on this list. And now we move to number 18. For number 18, I chose a book by John Keel, a huge pioneer in this field, one of the first to look into UFOs. And I could have chose any book by John Keel because he's great. But I chose The Mothman Prophecies, which is probably his most famous and well-known book. It's about UFOs and the whole weird series of events that occurred in West Virginia, I believe it was. The whole Mothman humanoid sightings, but lots of UFO encounters in there as well. It's a very interesting book. John Keel is one of few researchers who have tackled the paranormal aspects of UFOs. And the Mothman Prophecies is a gripping, unique, unusual book that deserves absolutely to be widely read. And I think you will enjoy it very much. And now we move to number 17. And for number 17, I chose a book by highly respected researcher Robert Hastings. The book is called UFOs and Nukes. And I love this book because Robert Hastings dug deep. This is a big book, and it absolutely cements in stone the fact that UFOs are very, very concerned about our use of nuclear power. Very concerned. This absolutely shows there is a connection there, that UFOs are visiting nuclear bases, nuclear missile sites, nuclear-powered craft of any kind, nuclear weapons. UFOs are there. If you want to know about the ET agenda when it comes to their concern of nuclear power, you absolutely should check out this book, UFOs and Nukes, by Robert Hastings. I loved it. And for slot number 16, I chose Glimpses of Other Realities by Linda Moulton Howe. There are very few people who have been in this field for as long as Linda Moulton Howe. She's probably best known for her research into the whole cattle mutilation phenomena, but she is today a very active researcher into UFOs. She hasn't written a lot of books, but I had to include at least one of them on this list. And so I chose that one. She's a very highly respected researcher, and I think has had a huge influence on this field and deserves a place on this list. And that's why I gave her spot number 16. For number 15, I chose an absolutely unique book called The Aliens and the Scalpel by Dr. Roger Leir. He's really one of very, very few researchers who have looked into the alien implant phenomena. The Aliens and the Scalpel was a big bestseller. Dr. Roger Leir, of course, is famous for actually operating on people who've had alien implants and removing them and studying them scientifically. And his research, I think, provides a smoking gun. It's absolute proof of extraterrestrial intervention. I do not see how anyone can read this book and not come away convinced that something very strange is going on here. That UFOs are real, that UFO abductions are real, that alien implants are being put in people's bodies, and the discoveries he made will, I think, be forever remembered as absolutely pioneering research into this field. And that's why I gave him this very high ranking on this list. And for number 14, I chose the book UFO Crash at Roswell by Kevin Randall and Don Schmidt. There are probably 50 to 100 books written about the Roswell UFO crash. I very nearly included the UFO or the Roswell UFO incident by Don Berliner instead. But this book, UFO Crash at Roswell, is more comprehensive. It's really the seminal book, well, not the seminal book, but I think the most comprehensive book on the Roswell UFO crash. Also, I love this second book in the series, The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell. I think this is Kevin Randall's best book by far. He's written a number of books, some of which are really good, some of which are just kind of make me scratch my head. So I don't agree with some of Kevin Randall's research, but I really think that his research, and particularly with this book, The UFO Crash at Roswell, is a great read and really gives you a good overview of what happened at Roswell. And wow, what a book, what a case. I really enjoyed this book. So that's why I gave him the number 14 slot. And for number 13, I chose basically the researcher Jacques Vallée and any book he's ever written. Jacques Vallée is a superstar in this field. He's probably one of the best researchers out there. He's written just about more UFO books than almost anyone in this field, dozens at least. And I chose his book, Anatomy of a Phenomenon, because it's one of his early books. As an astronomer, he took a very scientific, objective look at the UFO phenomena. But all of his books could have earned a spot on this list. Messengers of Deception, The Invisible College, Dimensions, Confrontations. He's written quite a few books, actually, and they are all good. Edge of Reality with J. Allen Hynek. I love, love, love the books by Jacques Vallée, and I could not miss out on him. And so he got a pretty high ranking here on my list as the number 13 slot. And for number 12, I chose a truly pioneering book called The Tujunga Canyon Contacts. This is by Anne Druffel and D. Scott Rogo. It's one of the first books to focus on a single UFO abduction case, which took place in Tujunga Canyon, California. I love this book. It's very well written. Takes a good objective scientific look at this fascinating UFO encounter case, which was well before this whole flood of encounters that really swept across the US and the world. It's an excellent book, kind of hard to find these days. I loved it. It's a real page turner. Can't recommend it enough. I love these early books on the UFO phenomena, and any book by Anne Druffel deserves to be on this list. And I chose the Tujunga Canyon Contacts. And for number 11, I chose the book Disclosure by Dr. Stephen Greer, MD. He is absolutely a controversial researcher, but his books are bestsellers, and his books are very, very interesting. He spearheaded the whole CE5 movement. He spearheaded the disclosure movement as well. And his book Disclosure just knocked my socks off. It is startling, the information he puts forth in this book. I think it's a book everyone should know about. Everyone should read this book. It's a monumental contribution, I think, to our understanding of the UFO phenomena. I loved it. My hat's off to Stephen Greer, despite all the controversy surrounding him. Whether you agree with some of his conclusions or some of his research or not, I think you will find Disclosure an excellent book. And so I gave it the number 11 spot. And now we get to the top 10. And boy, these are the books that I think a lot of you have heard of. And some of you may disagree with the books I chose for top 10, but this is my list. And for number 10, I chose Encounters with UFO Occupants by Coral and Jim Lorenzen. Coral and Jim Lorenzen are true pioneers in this field, true heroes to the field of ufology. This field would not be where it is today without them. They advanced it decades. They were the first to really look into the UFO phenomena. They formed the group APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, which was the first really popular UFO citizens group that got thousands of members and just grew and grew and grew. MUFON is really patterned directly after APRO, as are all the other UFO groups. So yeah, hats off to Jim and Coral Lorenzen. I would recommend any book by Jim and Coral Lorenzen. They are all good, all great, really. And Encounters with UFO Occupants is just fascinating stuff. I am 100% sure you will enjoy it. They're very respected researchers, and what they did for the UFO field is miles and miles beyond almost any other UFO researcher out there. That's why I gave him number 10 on this list. And for number 9, I think this might surprise some people. There's only one book I know that's written by these guys. It's written by Lawrence Fawcett and Barry Greenwood, and the book is called Clear Intent. This is a huge book. I mean huge, I mean important. It was also republished as the UFO cover-up. And what I like about this book, Clear Intent, is that it was the first to really talk about UFOs hovering over military installations. Air Force bases, Army bases, naval installations. These guys proved, using the Freedom of Information Act, using first-hand interviews, government documents, they proved that our government is very much interested in UFOs. They proved that UFOs are hovering over our military installations and tracking our technological progress. This is the book you can give to a UFO skeptic, and they will come away as a believer for sure if you can get them to read it. I don't think a skeptic has a leg to stand on. There's just no way you can debunk the reports in this book. It is one of the best UFO books out there. Please read it. I'm sure you will enjoy it. And for number 8, I chose one of the best researchers of all time, Leonard Stringfield. Leonard Stringfield is the go-to guy for UFO crash retrievals. He alone was researching UFO crashes when no one else would touch them. His books are actually a series of, started out as pamphlets, sort of, the status reports. They have now been published as mainstream popular books, which you can find on Amazon. These status reports by Leonard Stringfield are all about UFO crash retrievals. And he was the first, to really talk about them. If you want to know about UFO crashes, he has the info. I mean, he received death threats. He was just, I'm speechless when it comes to Leonard Stringfield, because his research is just beyond the pale. We would be lost without Leonard Stringfield's research into UFO crash retrievals. He busted this aspect of UFO research wide open, and it's because of him we take UFO crash retrievals seriously. It's the cutting edge of UFO research. It's a real shame we lost him, but his books will live on forever, I think. So take a look at the status reports. I pretty much can guarantee that you will be amazed and you will learn quite a bit about UFOs from them. And now we move to number 7. And for number 7, I chose the book Abduction by John Mack, MD. And I had to give John Mack a real high spot on this list because he's a Pulitzer Prize winner. His book is very well written. It's a massive volume. And it will pretty much, you could read Abduction by John Mack and you will know all you need to know about UFO contact. I think it provides a really good objective look into the UFO phenomena. It is not, fear-based. It's just very objective. And here's a gentleman who's very well educated, who tackled this UFO subject when almost no one else in the academic community would. And so my hat's off to John Mack. And I think any one of his books could have earned a place on this list. But I chose the book Abduction because I think it's probably one of his best. And that's why I gave him the number 7 spot. And for number 6, I chose one of my favorite researchers of all times, Timothy Good, and his book Above Top Secret. This is the first book to really lay down the government cover-up, the UFO history of the government cover-up across the world, the United States and the world. Some of the other books on this list, I think, borrowed from Timothy Good's research here, and is absolutely one of the biggest contributions to this field. Any book by Timothy Good is excellent. I love his research. I love his books. And Above Top Secret is one I've read several times. And I just can't put it down. It is amazing. Please look into Timothy Good's book, Above Top Secret. You will not be disappointed. And now we move to the top 5. Oh, this is where we start to give the drum roll. So for top 5, I chose The Andreessen Affair by Raymond Fowler. The Andreessen Affair is all about, of course, Betty Andreessen and her encounters with gray-type ETs. This is one of the first books to cover a first-hand case of UFO encounters. It's actually a series of books. I love Raymond Fowler's books. All of them are fantastic. The Allagash abductions, wow, what a book. But his work into the Andreessen Affair this is really a landmark book, and absolutely deserves to be read. It's just fascinating stuff. And I think you will enjoy it very much. The Andreessen Affair by Raymond Fowler. Check it out. You won't be disappointed. And now we move to number 4. Very nearly gave this book the number 1 spot, but somehow it slipped down to number 4. I don't know why. Because it's one of my favorite books of all times. And this is The Interrupted Journey by John G. Fuller. This is such a good book. This is, of course, about the Betty and Barney Hill abduction, the absolute landmark case, the first book published about UFO abductions. This went off like an atom bomb. I mean, this really introduced people to the idea that we are being contacted by ETs, abducted. So yeah, I love this book. You can read it over and over again. It's amazing. Any book by John G. Fuller. Incident at Exeter is equally gripping. What a great book. I'm sure you've probably already read it if you have any interest in UFOs. But if you haven't, get it right away. You will be amazed at his in-depth research into the Betty and Barney Hill case. And for number 3, I chose Missing Time by Bud Hopkins. Bud Hopkins is, hands down, I think, probably the leading researcher into UFO abductions. His book, Missing Time, was originally published by a small publisher, but was republished by a major publisher and became a huge bestseller. It's very objectively written with just transcripts of hypnosis sessions and some of his conclusions. His follow-up book, Intruders, is equally gripping. Bud Hopkins is responsible, I think, almost single-handedly for popularizing this subject. I love his books. I don't think they're fear-based. I think it's a very objective look at the UFO phenomena. And I really love his research. I met him firsthand. He's a great guy. It's a shame he passed away. But his books, whether it's the Brooklyn Witness about the Brooklyn Bridge abduction, or Intruders, or Unseen, any of the books he's put out are fantastic books. Can't recommend them enough, and that's why I gave him the number 3 spot. And for number 2, I chose one of the biggest heroes in ufology, one of the best books ever written, which is The UFO Experience by J. Allen Hynek. J. Allen Hynek is, of course, the astronomical consultant for Project Blue Book, and it's because of him that UFOs are really taken seriously today. He defected from Project Blue Book, was disgusted at the way they were handling the UFO subject, criticized them harshly because he said that they would only place attention on cases that were easily explained prosaically, as perhaps the planet Venus or something along those lines, and ignored cases that had really good potential and pay dirt. So we owe a huge debt of gratitude to J. Allen Hynek and his research into UFOs. I love the work he's done. All of his books are absolutely great books, and the UFO Experience is one of his best. Check it out for sure. And you've probably guessed which book is number one, and this may not be your number one book, but this is the one I chose, and that is Communion by Whitley Strieber. The reason I chose Communion is for a number of reasons. It was the first book to hold the number one bestseller slot for many weeks. I mean, it stayed a New York Times bestseller, I believe, for over a year. Communion went off like an atom bomb. This is the first time anyone of any renown stepped forward and admitted to being an experiencer. Whitley Strieber's book is very, very well written. It's gripping. It's a page turner from the first page all the way to the last. He followed it up with really interesting books like Transformation, another book, Confirmation. I mean, all of his books are outrageously good. I love the research of Whitley Strieber. He's still in this field today. And the book Communion is just a real wow book. I love it. And I think you will love it too. If you haven't read it, definitely check it out. It's still a bestseller to this day. And I think it deserves to be. And that's why I gave it the number one spot, because I think it's probably the single most influential book in UFO history. Though some people may disagree, but that's my list from the top 50 books all the way down to the number one spot. Again, there were many books I could have included. Oh, like The Missing Times by Hansen is his last name, which proved the media cover-up. The books by George Adamski probably deserve to be mentioned because he was hugely influential, whether you believe him or not. I mean, there's a lot of books that just missed out, and I'm really sorry that I didn't include perhaps a book that you're missing on this list. But I did the best I could. You may have noticed I didn't put any of my own books on this list. I wanted to, but I just didn't feel like it was appropriate because I have written, gosh, more than 20 books about UFOs specifically and a bunch about the paranormal. If I had to choose which of my books I would include on this list, it would be a toss-up, I think, between The Healing Power of UFOs, which is a really unique book and the only book to focus on this aspect of the UFO phenomena. I might also choose my book Onboard UFO Encounters, which is perhaps one of my most successful books, or Undersea UFO Base. I love that book as well. Or Schoolyard UFO Encounters. I mean, I could go on. But yeah, probably I would choose The Healing Power of UFOs or Onboard UFO Encounters if I could squeeze them onto this list somewhere. But I didn't because, again, I'm the one who's putting together this list, and I felt like that would just be inappropriate. But I definitely wanted to give myself a little bit of a shout-out because I've been researching this field for 35 years now, most of my life. And I feel like this is a very important field. There's been a lot of research done into UFOs. And these are the books I think everyone should read, and that they will absolutely convince you of the reality of UFOs. All of them have made a huge contribution to the UFO field. And that if you want to know what you should read on UFOs, I think these books are well recommended and well respected within the UFO field. And I think you'll enjoy them very much. That's why I wanted to put this video out so I can answer this question I keep getting, like, what should I read about UFOs? Well, these are the books you should read. So I hope you've enjoyed this little countdown of the top 50 UFO books. I want to thank you again for watching. I truly appreciate it. I love all of you, and until next time, keep having fun.